Civilized Society.
Here's the thing about the Truman Show. It has Jim Carrey. And that's fucking weird for a movie that we're going to talk about with some pretty deep philosophical concepts. And we're going to talk about a movie with Jim Carrey in it. When I was first introduced to this movie, I resisted because I saw it had Jim Carrey. And I said, there's no way that this movie is going to be at the level of, complication that makes me work that I enjoy with a movie. But lo and behold, apparently Jim Carrey, we could do a whole fucking episode on Jim Carrey because his deal, he said that after this movie, he kind of had an awakening. That's not fucking true, buddy, okay? Because I looked at his filmography, and this fool did a bunch of, like, Bruce Almighty, the fucking Minions, Count Olaf voicing a video game. He did a bunch of fucking, Hollywood money-making cartoon shit after this. But he said in an interview, he was like, after this movie, I was Truman. I came alive. And then you did like Bruce Almighty and shit and continued making funny faces. He didn't go off the fucking deep end until recently. And I looked into his deep end because I wanted to know if it was true that this movie was some kind of, spiritual process for him too. Because in a way, I think this is what resonates so much about this movie, because it did resonate. Weird movie in that it abides by enough of the mainstream kind of like Hollywood blockbuster standards of film creation to you can watch it with your parents and they're like, that's a great movie.
Hi.
You gotta let me.
So I think the viewers just need to understand what was happening there. I want to give them
I've been usurped. I'll drink my coffee
while you're doing the monologue.
But you can't just throw me off.
While you're doing your intro, I was typing in the chat thing, word of the podcast over and over in all capital letters. Because I'm on the side of the people. I'm on the side of the viewers, and I know what the people want. The people want the word of the podcast.
They don't
Am I right or am I wrong?
Hollywood.
So, I'll tell you another thing. Well, in your official notes, your official show notes, oftentimes you leave out the word of the podcast, and then you make me go find the word of the podcast in the other notes, the real notes.
I'm not okay, yeah.
So look, I thought about different words of the podcast this time. I feel like things have gotten a little religious lately, but let's just go straight. Let's go into the religion. The word of the podcast is Christ. Now, the reason it's Christ is because one of the main characters is the director inside this film, not the real director, is called Christoff, which it's kind of funny because he just has this one name and you think of that as this very artistic thing to do.
Yeah.
Also, I believe he wears a beret during most of that.
He does wear a beret. This is a big deal. This character, I thought about this character a lot because he's so a caricature of the kind of smooth talking art genius. But it's almost so much that I'm like, I hope that we all know that this is ridiculous and not like, this is what an arty person looks like. I'm going to give the movie the credit and assume that they pumped this character up to ridiculous levels of beret wearing to kind of smooth jazz listening art director, whatever.
Yeah, that's what he does. I mean, how I feel about berets. You know about my official stance on berets.
Why don't you make it known?
I'm gonna refine it and then release it in a public statement. I'll circle back around to it. The podcast, the word of the podcast rather, is Christ. Christ is from the Greek, anointed one. Think about that. What does it mean to be anointed? Well,
blessed.
Doesn't really have much to do with this part. Anointing back in the ancient world was pouring oil on your head, essentially, and which was a sign of kingship.
Oh, that's true.
So getting a little bit into the history of what that means. However, now I have to go back to my notes. Got to go to the real notes because it's been purged. Okay, anyway, because you purged the word of the podcast. I don't know if you do it on purpose. I'm unclear.
No, I didn't. I don't.
Very well.
I wouldn't deny the people.
This was a translation of the word Messiah. Anyway, kings, high priests, prophets were anointed. Again, anointed means to pour something over your head. I think primarily olive oil, but I don't know. So then you have this Christoff character. Mm-hmm. This threw me off a little bit because off or ov is a Slavic suffix meaning belonging to or son or daughter of. So I'm a little unclear about the point, because then it makes it seem like the director
is a Christ-like figure.
Well, no, it would be son of Christ, which doesn't make any sense because Truman is really the son of Christoff, the true man. I think this is pretty clear to everybody. In fact, it's a little bit
on the nose.
It's a little on the nose, right? True man. Okay.
Yeah, but, I mean, we'll get to that. I sometimes appreciate when movies do that if they make sure to do other things more opaquely and not make it so obvious.
Yeah, I think that it's a reasonable.
It's fun.
It's a reasonable move.
It's
a reasonable
move. Like Truman, the name Truman. Actually, look, as I was originally saying, this movie is really interesting because you can watch this movie and be like, nice, cool, all right, bye, and miss a lot of the depth to it because Jim Carrey is distracting. You're prepared for some kind of silly comedy, and you gotta be. You once said that, I think it was with the episode that we did House. I will always say it in the proper voice. You have to say House in the voice of the monster of that movie. It's excellent. That episode of the podcast, you were fairly perturbed by the movie, and you had said that you admitted that you were not in the right space emotionally or whatever to accept that movie. And you know what? That is my experience with the Truman Show. When I was first introduced to this movie, I was not prepared for it. I wasn't ready to accept the messages of the Truman Show. And I was just distracted, and I was not willing to do the work to see this. And I was not,
recently?
No, I saw this movie like over a year ago.
See, I hadn't seen it. This is the first time I've seen it, and I'm
I would have never watched it, but I was introduced to it, and I didn't think too much of it at the time. I liked it enough, but it's interesting. What I was thinking about this movie last night was that I think in a way that what makes it so it is a very respected and admired movie throughout time, and it's been revisited as it's become more relevant because of social media and celebrity culture and surveillance. All the concepts that are in this movie only became more blatantly part of our normal lives. And so I think it was awarded some kind of title as like one of the 10 most prophetic movies, something like that. So this movie is really respected as deeper than just, some kind of entertainment.
It reminds me of kind of an older school.
Well done.
It reminds me of a kind of older Ray Bradbury era type science fiction where they do get a little on the nose with the use of things like Truman and Christoff and all that, but it sometimes does end up being prophetic.
City. There's something about...
But it's sci-fi. It is kind of a sci-fi movie, right?
It is a sci-fi film in many ways. And so, I think what people end up liking about this film so much over the years is that it's very, very, very true to the human journey. There's elements of of Truman's process of developing as a character throughout the film that is true for every person. And I think that, to be a little melodramatic even, I had to go through my own Truman-esque journey to be able to see more about what was going on in this movie. Because a lot about what this movie, and it's not that, necessarily I was living in a master planned community and being surveilled. It's more that one of the major themes in this movie is the pursuit of truth above accepting the narratives and illusions of what you think life is or should be. And in a way, one of the themes in the movie that I think is crucial to be able to really understand it is the loss of naivety, in a sense.
I think what you're basically saying, though, is that you're ready to publicly announce that you believe in QAnon.
I will circle back to you on that, and also
is that what you're trying to get at?
A statement. I guess it could sound like I'm getting at that. No, we don't know. I don't know anything about QAnon. I'm actually really ignorant about this. I don't know anything. I don't associate me with that because I know everybody knows a lot about it except for me, apparently.
I don't know anything about it.
And everybody has huge opinions on it, and I don't because I don't know anything about it, and I don't want to know. I don't want to know. If people want to be fucking crazy.
I think it's a bit over. I think it's a bit like us doing the Truman Show, like me watching the Truman Show for the first time. And this year, they came out in 1998, So it's kind of
like, this movie's really important, guys.
I just want to go and do a retro I wonder if there'll be a retro QAnon movement, like 20 years from now. It'll be like, yeah,
a revival.
I don't know. All right, sorry.
A reunion.
Sorry, I brought it to the
You're derailing.
Yeah, I probably definitely just got kicked off YouTube for this one.
Ooh, yeah, you can't even say.
I don't know.
QAnon. You gotta slur it or something. Be careful.
I don't know.
We're gonna have to bleep it. You're gonna have to bleep it and censor yourself. Okay, so here's the thing. Let's roll along into one of the major parts of this movie, which my fool ass didn't really see it the first time. But it's just cool. It's cool when you watch a movie. Whenever you watch a movie a year before, and then you go back to it and you watch it a year later, and suddenly all these things jump out at you. And it's because you've gained life experience that allows you to understand things at a deeper level or to see patterns that you didn't see before because you hadn't experienced them. So one of the first things that jumped out to me was that this is basically, in many ways, Plato's Allegory of the Cave. And so you can see Christoff Seahaven as the cave. And Christoff even says at one point in the movie, because some journalist asks him, how do you think it is that Truman hasn't figured it out? So Truman's I think he's 29 at the end of the movie. And they say, how could he have not figured it out until now? And he says, we accept the world with which we're presented, which is essentially a pretty apt summary of Plato's prisoners in the cave. So in the Truman Show, you begin in the cave, essentially, which is it's very parallel to the cave. You begin in the cave, which is this world of illusions. And Sea Haven is an illusion. And everything in Sea Haven is an illusion. He has the illusion of a community, the illusion of neighbors, the illusion of freedom, the illusion of love. These are all almost placeholders for the real thing. And
you call them illusions. You call them illusions, but as long as he doesn't know the truth, he feels that they are really his neighbors. He feels that he experiences them as those things.
As the prisoners did. For the prisoners, so if you're not familiar with the Allegory of the Cave, it's a bunch of prisoners hanging out in a cave unwillingly. They are chained up, so they can only see the wall of the cave, and there's fire behind them or something, and the world passes by behind them, but all they see are the shadows projected onto the cave wall that they are chained to face forever. Now, they see these shadows. I guess they were chained up since birth. We don't know.
It says not. I'm not clear on why, but Plato is, I believe, clear about saying it's not from birth. But I didn't go farther into understanding, trying to delve into why that is. And I think that matters somehow to the philosophy, but I'm not sure why it is. But I specifically read it's not from birth.
Well, what the hell happened to those prisoners?
I don't know. I don't know why they are put down there.
All right. Well, we start with them down there. Someone wants to let us know how they got there, that would be interesting. Probably more interesting than QAnon's.
I was going to say it, but I was going to let it go. I was going to say it, but I'm going to let it go.
We got to stop. We're going to date this podcast full of bullshit that's going to be forgotten in a year, and it's going to be us being like, QAnon, hee. And people are going to be like, what the fuck is that? Okay, so you've got these prisoners. They're looking at the cave wall, and apparently they've forgotten everything except for the shadows on the wall. And they name these shadows. Oh, this shadow is a dog. This shadow is a woman. This shadow is a tree. And they begin to predict these shadows as, okay, every time the horse walks by, there's a person on it. Every time the dog walks by, there's a barking sound. And so they use the information they have around them to kind of ascribe value and meaning to these shadows. These shadows are the real thing for them. The dog is the shadow. Just like we would look at a dog and say, this is a dog, these prisoners look at the shadow and say, this is a dog. And it's a really interesting scene in the Truman Show where he's sitting in the car with Meryl, and he says, look, lady, dog, guy on a bike. And he notices the pattern. And this is one of the things that is part of the allegory of the cave, is that people, they watch these shadows and start to notice patterns and develop stories about them. And that's how they ascribe value to these shadows that otherwise we in the real world consider just the shadow. So you have this whole scene of a world that is a shadow of the real world, essentially. And the first part, I think it's pretty much the first major scene of the movie is when a lamp falls from the sky and into Truman's in the front yard. And
right.
I love this scene actually, because to me it's the thing about this movie is it's very, very, very highly metaphorical. And that's why I think sometimes movies like this can be a little like, oh, we get it, it's true man or whatever, because it's heavy use of metaphor and symbolism to tell a story that already has been told. And sometimes that can be done badly. But
I don't think it was done poorly, though. I think it was just enough to be entertaining, but also it was good for what it was. But
it's done very well, I think. It's actually done very well. And I like the scene with where the lamp falls, because this is kind of this is analogous to when you have a crack in your own worldview. So you're going about your life, you have an idea of what the world is, and something happens, and it cracks that idea of what the world is. Suddenly, things don't make as much sense. You can have, you may trust someone, and then that person might actually take advantage of that trust. And you've learned something now that, oh, the world is not exactly what I thought it was. And that's that loss of naivety. It's literally the world falling apart around you. The world cracks around you. And that forces you, and this is a major theme in the film, that forces you to decide, do I pursue understanding what lies beyond this crack? Or do I keep going, push it aside and keep going and ignore it? He ignores the lamp for the most part.
Right. When I saw your notes, I thought, he doesn't actually, that's the first thing we see as change in the outside world going onto his world, but he kind of just ignores it. And I think that goes with the allegory of the cave, where he says most people are going to just ignore anything from the world of higher forms coming in and trying to show them that the shadow world of the cave is not the real, not reality.
Yeah, and so what I like about this is, and there's a lot of ways that you can understand this. So there's the whole thing, truth is, what is truth? Truth can be a fact. Truth can be understanding the nature of the world. Truth can be understanding how better to navigate your own world as an individual. It doesn't have to be necessarily Plato's truth of what is a dog, what is a tree, what is the essence of these things. In some ways, that's not entirely the truth that Truman is pursuing, but he still is taking on this kind of philosopher's journey of seeking more truth than what he has now. And so that idea of pursuing truth is one of the central things in the movie. And I like the lamp because it's the first crack in his world, essentially. And he doesn't chase it. I just
thought about that, though. I did just consider that while you were saying that's the first thing. And then I thought, you know what? Because I was thinking that means that you require something from the outside world, if we're going with the allegory of the cave thing, something for the world to crack in order to give you the possibility even to get out of it. However, I think that we see that Truman has been, even prior to this, kind of bizarrely and piecing together pieces of this, the face of the girl that had earlier tried to warn him that he was not living in reality. So even beyond the lamp falling from the sky, something else is going on. And it may not be that maybe he believed the story that they gave him, where they basically carted her off and said she's crazy. Yeah. But there's something prior to that. And then you see later in the film these little moments of where he maybe has started to glimpse the world, which is kind of interesting, too, going back to the idea of when do you get chained into the cave in the world of shadows? Because remember, it shows him as a child walking up a little hill and almost seeing that there's a whole movie set there. And his father tells him, what does he say? There's a line.
You need to know your limitations, Truman.
Right. And that's what starts to imprison him, those types of statements. So I'm not clear about the specifics of why Plato said that people are not put in the cave from birth. But I wonder if the maker of this film knows that, and that's an indication of what it's about, is that when he's a little kid, he's actually, in his curiosity and he's not been conditioned yet, he's more likely to stumble upon the ideal world, the world of forms, not getting out of the cave.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. I particularly thought that it was important to notice the part with Sylvia, the woman that tries to tell him, you're on a movie set, this isn't real, because he actually doesn't totally absorb that message. She tells him all this stuff and he's kind of in shock, and he still wants to find her, and it sets him off on a certain amount. It's unsettles him enough to start looking around. But it's not enough he doesn't just accept, oh, this is a show, this is fake. Oh, okay. It's an important part because it shows that's the prisoner that has at that point he's still the prisoner in the cave. She's outside the cave. She's come to tell him this isn't the real world, but that's not enough. It can't be you can't have someone just come and throw truth at you. You have to be willing to seek it as an individual yourself. Every person has to decide to undertake that pursuit themselves and find it for themselves. And so
we see in this undercurrent we always talk about when we talk about Nietzsche and we're talking about Plato says, does he not say something like, and isn't it really Socrates? I mean, it's Socrates in the dialogue, I think, but Plato's writing it, and we don't know if it's actually Socrates' idea or Plato's idea, but he says most people won't. I'm not even sure if he advises most people to do this, does he? Does he advise all of humanity to try to seek higher forms and getting out of the cave or not?
I don't think he advises. He was actually one of the philosophers that was against the Athenian democracy, partially because the Athenian democracy is what sentenced Socrates to death. And so he believed that because people were already inherently unlikely to take that journey to try to escape their own sea haven, essentially, that democracy, the Athenian democracy, was a danger, because you would have an instance where someone that was taking on that journey was put to death by those who did not want to take that journey. And so he did believe that most people will remain in Sea Haven, essentially.
I'm not sure. I guess what I don't understand is did he just accept the fact that most people can't get out of Sea Haven / the cave, and that's just how it was, but that's not, or did he actually think most people shouldn't even try? Because I feel like there's some sense of like,
that's
he's
Nietzsche.
saying that the philosopher.
I think you're conflating Nietzsche, because
I'm not
Nietzsche
conflating
is the
them.
one.
I understand. I'm drawing a potential parallel between the two because
wow.
I'm trying.
This podcast is getting beyond my control.
I'm on the coffee.
Yeah, we both are on the coffee.
I'm on the coffee.
Ready to draw parallels and to conflate and to dig and to go beyond the world of illusions.
I mean, I've already jumped to Nietzsche in the first 15 minutes of the podcast, and usually I wait till hour 2. So think about that. And I don't know the answer. You know what? Shame on me. I should have found out the answer before I posed the question. But I thought that maybe Plato was saying the only people that can actually go outside of the cave and get out of there are philosophers. And I don't think that and then later I know he says that in the Republic that the ideal state is essentially kind of a totalitarian, not democracy of philosophers. And then that to me
the philosopher king idea.
Right. And so then I'm thinking, well, he must have thought there's something anti-democratic in his setup of the allegory of the cave, because he says most people can't get to the truth, but hey, I'm a philosopher, I can. Mm-hmm. And then later on he's like, oh, and by the way, I should rule over you because I can do that. Which maybe is true. I don't know. Maybe maybe Plato should rule over us, but I'm just saying.
Old Bois was not happy about them killing his friend. So I think on some levels Plato was, had an axe to grind. And maybe it is of sound reasoning, and maybe in a way he is. I mean, look, when I think of the ideal government, it's a totalitarian state where I run it. I think that's what everybody thinks in a way their super ideal government would be. It's everything that I want, and I make all the decisions, and no one bothers me. Great.
I'm not sure. It's funny. I also think that I would be an excellent. I've talked about this before, right? That I should be a benign dictator. Have I not talked about that yet?
Not on the podcast.
Unfortunately, not on the podcast. I'll make a public announcement about that
when you're ready, yeah. Okay.
But I hope, actually, that most people aren't as insane as we are, and that the majority of people have some humility and think, I shouldn't be the totalitarian dictator of the world.
Well, that's the ideal approach, is to understand that you're probably a fool, and you would probably make a fool's decision, and the slowness of collective rule is what tempers those foolish decisions the individual often makes very quickly. That's why when you have a monarchy like a king or some type of or a dictatorship, you have one person that can make decisions and shit happens real quickly, and that's also why shit can go badly real quickly too.
But the ancient Greeks, and I'll tell you what I think I'm going to have to do. I'm going to have to just start. I'm considering just. I'm just going to start wearing a toga. Because we start talking about Greece a lot. Plus, I have a problem finding T-shirts for the podcast.
Yeah. If you just wore the same toga all the time.
Right. So
I will have to fire you, though. So just,
You're not the totalitarian dictator of me.
Of this podcast, I am the...
Well, that's under dispute.
I'm the secret chief magister of the...
You threw me off. You threw me off. I threw myself off about the toga. And then you threw me off by your power play.
You're wiling around.
It's because I'm on the coffee.
All right, listen, I'll tie it back. The question is, did Plato believe every person should try to leave the cave? Or did he believe that really you should just hang out in the cave like the fucking pleb you are?
Tyrants! That's what it was. Sorry, thank you. The Greek...
I'm glad that I jogged that to your memory.
You did. It did. Because you started re-summarizing it, and then I was able to focus.
It's not because of my inherently tyrannical personality.
So the word tyrant has a negative connotation for us, as it should be. Great. I'm not for tyrants either. But the Greeks actually purposely voted into power. I don't know if that's exactly accurate, but they would establish tyrants on purpose in times of disorder and it would have a limited in the Golden Age of Greece and a little before that. It would have a time limit, so they would appoint a tyrant or dictator and say you have a year to sort things out, and then you have to give up power. And then I think oftentimes what would happen, and we may have talked about this before, is they would ostracize them afterwards because they're handing over a lot of power to one person. And they're saying, okay, you have a year to sort some things out, but we don't want you to be a tyrant forever. And then you need to go.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, thank you. I recovered my thought about tyrants.
Well, here's the important thing that kind of sums up Plato's whole deal there. Plato's deal.
Yeah.
Is he believed that the average person would not be willing to risk and lose their shadows, essentially. And in the movie, Truman actually does have to give up his wife and the life that he knows to pursue the truth that he thinks is out there. But the reward is that he finds out those things were illusions. His marriage, his life, even his friends, all of these were illusions of what they seem to be. And so in being willing to lose everything, essentially everything, he has the chance now to gain the true forms of what he's lost. Now, these forms, let's get into forms. I really like Plato's idea of the forms because, okay, so when you're replacing these illusions with truth, and this is a big thing, because, yeah, sure, maybe most people are going to stay in their sea haven hell and they will not escape the cave, but it's important to make an effort. I do believe that trying to see how closely our illusions are to the forms, which is the true nature of something. So Plato's idea, we use forms differently from the way that Plato defined them. Forms were the ideal. So you had the form of romantic love, the form of a government, the form of a friendship. And these were, if you could imagine the perfect relationship, the perfect government, that is the form of that concept. And so what we have in reality are lesser substitutions that are trying to get to the perfect form. And when your substitutions for the forms are lesser than, they lead you astray. So, I mean, this is an interesting idea because especially, I think you can liken the illusions that we hold about our everyday world to kind of the narratives that we tell ourselves about things. So it's really interesting. So recently, I went to the gun range, shooting off guns at the gun range. And this is an interesting thing because it was me doing something that's really different. And when you don't investigate something for yourself, you have a narrative about it. You tell yourself something about it so that you can have some knowledge about it, even if that is illusory knowledge. But you don't know how real it is until you start to actually investigate. And you have to be willing. This is why people don't, and this is why I do think perhaps, I think Plato was a little bit of a misanthropic character. And as such, he probably didn't think that people should even bother pursuing truth, that they should leave it to the professionals, essentially. But the thing about that is that when you hold on to these narratives, I'm going to call them narratives. I would conflate illusions with narratives. A narrative is kind of the illusory story we tell ourselves about something. And the illusion itself maybe is the form, or not Plato's form, but the physical representation that we think of it as. So the narrative might be everyone that shoots guns is some kind of conservative, asshole, aggressive, whatever. But then if you push that and you investigate it more, like I did, it's not that I thought that everybody that shot guns was assholes or whatever, but I was not in that world at all. So all I had was my narrative, which is, I'm sure it's fine and all, but I'm not a gun person. How about that? I'm not a gun person. I'm not interested in shooting guns. I think they're kind of violent, and that's my illusion that I place on the idea of guns. But once you start to push and you investigate, and so I thought, well, I'm going to shoot a gun and see what's going on here. And you realize that your narrative is not entirely accurate. So when I went to the gun range, there's all different kinds of people there. All different kinds of people. Like, it was definitely not just everybody with Trump hats or Western cowboys and whatever. All kinds of people there. Everybody's super nice. And it was fine. It was not as, scary or dangerous or, this harsh environment that I felt, I'm going to be unwelcomed here. It was actually a really welcoming, safe, cool environment. I really enjoyed it. And I had to replace my illusion, my narrative of what this was, what that subculture was, with something now that is a little closer to the form. And so that's what I think is an interesting thing here, is the idea of trying to replace our narratives with Plato's forms. Not that you can ever get to the perfect form, but you want to aim at that. And so that's the thing, though. You have to be willing to let go of the illusions, of the narratives. You have to be willing to push them. So Plato says about the man that escapes the cave, previously, he had been looking merely at phantoms. Now he is nearer to the true nature of being. And this
Some people call me the man who escaped the cave.
I don't think people call you that. I wouldn't call you that.
Are you saying I haven't escaped the cave yet?
I say that you have a cave beard.
It's been a tough year. All right.
It's been a cave year.
It's been a tough year.
all in
It's
caves
been a
this
cave
year.
Yeah, come on.
It's a cave year.
I'm just going to pretend like I don't always look like this. That's what the pandemic's really helped.
I mean, that's true. It's true. Anyway, you're not at your form, You're at your illusion. Yourself is illusory.
This may be
Eventually
the form.
you'll reach a form.
This may be the true form. Well,
2020?
It's 20. Oh boy. I don't know.
We're just all trying to hold on. This better not be my fucking form, or I'm going to hang it up.
Well, I mean, if you want to,
God knows how long.
I mean,
I shot guns before I got a haircut.
It certainly did shatter some illusions. I mean, about the world, and you're like at a gun range at this point. So
ready to go.
Ready to go, like wearing American flag bandanas, probably. Yeah. So I mean, some illusions were.
Some illusions
changed.
Were fucking hung up, but at the same time, how many of the prisoners fought those for their illusions? That's the thing, is that.
So what Plato is really saying is give the prisoners guns.
Yeah. No. Okay. We'll get pulled off YouTube. Don't know.
Oh yeah, yeah. That sounds really. It's hard. No. It's hard to talk anymore.
Give the prisoners guns.
I don't know. That wasn't. This is the allegory of the cave.
Defund the police. Abolish the prisons.
All right, we're dating ourselves.
And then give the prisoners guns.
This is not going to be a ideal podcast, because we'll be talking about all these. The form
of this podcast is far. We are far from the ideal podcast form.
We are.
All right, let's keep it rolling. So here's the thing: Truman's in the cave. I really like the idea, though, because here you have all these illusions, all these kind of stand-ins for what a marriage should be. What a community should look like. And Christoff does say I gave him a chance for a normal life. This is what he says, your world is the one that is broken. Sea Haven is the way the world should be. But that's not real. What things should be is, different from what they truly are. And so Christoff creates this world of illusions for what he thinks things should be, but they aren't fully conceived. And this is what I think leads Truman to be so unsatisfied, because, you know, and it's a really interesting thing to see this character that has this kind of innate yearning for more. You know, it starts in the beginning of the film with him kind of, you know, I want to go to Fiji. And you see from him as a young child also these things of, I want to be an explorer. You know, there's this innate yearning for more than these illusions.
It's not innate.
Presented to him.
It's not, though, because I thought about that. The Fiji thing I thought was, oh, yeah, it's just some wacky thing he wants to do or whatever. We think of like people that are bored in middle America and they like have this fantasy of Fiji as an exotic place. But remember, the idea of Fiji was actually implanted into his mind by Sylvia, if I recall.
Yeah.
Who when they captured her, the father said, "We're going to Fiji." So it wasn't even his
but
idea.
He did want to explore from a child.
Not Fiji, though. As far as I know.
No, not Fiji. Well, the hell, I didn't know Fiji existed when I was a kid.
But your geographic knowledge as a child was wanting.
It was lacking. It's fine. When I was like 7 years old, I didn't know about Fiji. I knew about other islands. Not Fiji. Yeah. The island I have heritage in. That's it. Probably.
Hawaii.
I'm not Hawaiian. The Cuban island.
This starting my own rumors and conspiracies that you're actually from Hawaii.
Very good. That's fine, maybe.
I keep derailing your idea of the forms. I don't know about forms. What do I think about forms?
You can't know about forms because we're human beings and forms are perfect. So forms are inherently beyond our reach. But we can...
How can we even speak to them then?
We can't... You try to. That's the thing. You pursue them. You try to reach for perfection. And that's what we do all the time, unless you're some kind of miserable person or you're afraid of what's outside the cave.
I don't think that's true.
You may derail yourself.
Okay. Here's the thing. In defense of Sea Haven and in defense of Christoff. Sea Haven, I mean, look, a little boring, but I mean, it was regular. He was safe. He was taken care of by the entire world, essentially. All right. He had a job that was boring or whatever, but good enough. He had his house. He had his stuff. He had, I don't know, a friend. He had some things, you know.
Some things.
What we don't see is what happens after the end of the movie, where he then walks through the door and goes out into the real world. Maybe Christoff was right. Maybe the real world, because, you know, and they show this a little bit. You don't see the outer world that much in the film, but you do occasionally see... I won't say that it looks grimy, the real world or whatever, but they do kind of show, they make some little hints at turmoil. Like Sylvia in the real world has all these posters on her wall about protests, about freeing Truman. There is a little bit of this idea that, and Christoff says that the world outside is kind of terrible. You know, so... And
that's true. That's also inherently true.
So that can't be the form, because if the
well, no, the world isn't a form.
But within this film, Sea Haven is the world of the shadows, and the outer world, which we don't see much of, is the ideal form, is it not?
No. So the form is different. The world has forms within it. No, sorry. The world does not have forms, because no form exists. That's the thing. The form is perfection. So nothing perfect can exist. They are the ideal to which we try to aspire to. So there's the form of government. An ideal government would be XYZ, and then we try to aspire to that ideal. But this is always going to fall short in reality. And that's okay. But you want to try to get as close to the form, which requires, examination and not, moving outside the cave to do so. If all you're looking at is the shadow, the illusion of a government, you're going to be even farther from ever aspiring to the highest form that
I
it
reject
can be.
it. The reason I have to reject it... No,
I reject your rejection.
But I have to reject it. And I have to reject your rejection of my rejection because here's the problem. If the form does not have any reality, I insist that it must have a reality. Because if it doesn't...
I don't think so.
Well, I'm just going to believe it does. Because if it doesn't, then all the form is, you keep calling it this ideal, this state of perfection. But that very ideal and state of perfection is just a bunch of shadow people coming up with ideas of what they think is an ideal thing. And if you listen to Plato, he thinks he ought to rule over you as a philosopher king. And I think like ban music or something. Like he's really, like hardcore about some of his ideas as the ideal ruler. So is that the style? Forms have messed up my hairstyle.
Forms. Well, here's the thing: is that it is the ideal. That's what the forms are. Plato's.
Well, I mean, in the broader sense, you have to believe that the form is real. You have to believe there is a reality that holds the form. Otherwise,
God is a form. God would be a form. He would be perfection, right? A God would be perfect.
Sure. And this is where we get into this. Becomes very complicated.
Is God material? No.
Well, I have some things to say about that later in the podcast, as you well know.
Here's the thing. I think I'm just going to tie up with he has these unideal illusions for things in his life, and particularly I think the best example of that is the marriage. Here is Christoff's idea of what a marriage should be, and so it is kind of this half-hearted, weird representation of the perfect wife, but it's not satisfying. And you have Truman this whole time holding on to this passion for Sylvia, which is really interesting because I think in a way there's this idea that the kind of this sense of true love, of passion that can be awakened by a relationship by which when someone actually loves the other person kind of is what pushes him to seek more. So, and he has this love for Sylvia, and that's in a sense what kind of awakens him, which is a really interesting thing because there's a lot of there's quite a lot of elements where Truman seems like this teenager who is coming through an awakening to being an adult and moving away from the parent figure for independence. And that usually does happen. The first motion away from the parents is when what will ultimately replace the love of the parents, which is the significant partner. That's the only other person in your life that is ever as significant to you as your parents is going to be your partner. And so once he experiences a sense of true love for Sylvia, that's when he starts to have this sense of yearning for more. But he's in this marriage that is kind of a shadow of what you would think a marriage could be, but it does not aspire to the form of the relationship. It's lacking depth. It's lacking all these different factors that make a relationship real and more and better. So, he's uninspired by that relationship, and he's pursuing something more. Now, pushing away from Christoff is an interesting thing because here we have Christoff who's created a world that as it should be. And this, you were kind of touching on this in the beginning. What is Christoff? Is it Christ of Christ, or is it Christ off? A figure that is the off version of Christ. So
you have misread the word of the podcast
figure,
the etymology, but you're allowed to freeform on it. Yeah, and that's fair because maybe that is the case. So I think he's the demiurge. That's why I decided.
Well, why don't you go ahead and explain that?
Well, shall I? Or shall I? Or shan't I? Because I'm jumping ahead in our little outline. But
it's okay.
Okay, so I'm not going to get into this a lot because it's really complicated, and I don't understand it well enough to explain it. But the idea of the demiurge is something like this. It comes out of Platonic thought and Neoplatonism, and the early church, some of the early church, call them early church fathers, though they ended up being called heretics, I think, in the end. Some of the leaders of the early church.
Aren't we all?
Yeah, some of the leaders in the early church espoused a kind of Gnostic Christianity which had the demiurge in it. Now, what the demiurge is varies, but it's something like the creator of the material world. But then the material world, and this is why it's related to Plato, the Gnostics saw a separation between spirit and matter. Mm-hmm. They believed that the demiurge, which they sometimes associated with the Old Testament God, the creator of the world of matter, was actually not the supreme God, but was something one step under that. Now, a lot of people in history debated who or what or how the demiurge came about. But so there's other stories about it being, it gets really weird and complicated. There's a story roughly about the idea of Sophia, which I think means wisdom in Greece, creating the world kind of off to the side, the world of matter and everything, as a mistake. But the ultimate point of this demiurge discussion, my reason I'm bringing it up, because you're going to talk about René Descartes, is that there is this fundamental dichotomy running through, and I think we've seen it, we've been trying to figure it out, this fundamental dichotomy running through Platonic thought that then actually enters Christianity early on, but by, I think it's the Council of Nicaea, 380 something or another, I don't know. They call Nicene Christianity the official Christianity, and some of these earlier church thinkers like Valentinus, I believe, who are Gnostic Christians, are proclaimed heretics, and they are shunted off to the side. Now, this all will later, if we ever talk about it, we talk about Hermeticism and that kind of thing. It actually plays into that because you have this thread of Neoplatonism and Gnostic Christianity, which begins towards the beginning of the establishment of the Christian church, but then is submerged, but then comes about and plays out throughout history.
Wow. That's quite a lot. You know,
I demi-urge you to continue.
Okay, so there's two things I feel about these discussions. Like when we start talking about, is the world real? You know, sometimes I'm like, I honestly don't give a fuck because I have to do things. I need to eat. I need to go make a podcast. That's really important, of course. I need to, whatever. I need money and sleep, and I'm a human being. I am real enough, it's real enough. But on the other hand, sometimes I truly, genuinely enjoy these ideas because not for them per se, because they are a little bit like the discussions on free will, which you can find in our other episodes, particularly Hereditary Part 2. It's Part 2?
No, that's where we just start talking about demons.
Which one?
I think it's Part 1.
Part 1? Part 1. Hereditary Part 1. If you'd like more about free will, Hereditary Part 1. And these discussions, because they're in a way a little bit immovable. You kind of just have to parse it out, see what feels real, and then go with that. And then you live your life. But what I like about these discussions of, is the world real? How do we know that we're real? How do we know that anything is real? Is that it's such a human question. Only humans have the capacity and the burden of wondering whether their world and themselves are real. And there's something so, something so cute about it. I don't know. Like it's a weird thing to say, but it's like
you assume that you don't know. Whales might be wondering about Neoplatonism also, and they
have their own Plato.
There could be other. Well, now we're just flying out into speculation.
Let's drop that shit.
Correct.
Because they can't. Because the thing is, what's so cool about this is that human beings have the ability to transfer knowledge through time so efficiently that
whales
we can
do it through whale song.
Yeah, well, I mean, they don't
claims.
Pass them on. You better stop.
We're gonna get one of
those like shitty fact checks things like this video may contain inaccurate information.
The coffee's hit hard.
The entire
talking about
thing.
Look, whale songs transmitting knowledge.
We're trying to transmit some knowledge here. We're trying to transmit some knowledge.
Go ahead.
So here, if you go back to Christoff, so there's an interpretation of this that is somewhat religious, and there is it's worth looking at that. I don't think it's as simple as saying Christoff is God and Truman is like a human or Jesus or something. I think it's a little more complex and not as direct as that. So Descartes has the idea of the evil demon, but it's also termed the evil genius. I think in the original French he writes. Do I dare say it in French? It's
that's your call.
Mauvais génie. Mauvais. Okay.
Mauvais génie.
There you go.
Bad genie or bad genius or whatever.
Essentially, yeah, exactly. And so evil genius essentially, which is interesting because Christoff is this character of the genius that uses his genius for dark purposes. And that idea that Descartes had was essentially that how do we know things are real? How do we know that our world is our world and not an entire illusion created by an evil genius, a demon?
There is this is rare, but this is an emergency word of the podcast alert. And every now and then, because something just...
we need a special, like, what was the sound I was going to do?
No, that's
We're
the
interrupting.
sound.
I don't give a shit. I like it. I think it's
different.
Wonderful.
I'll make up a little theme and I'll play it and I'll edit it in over your words and it'll be an emergency.
Okay.
Genius, late 14th century. Hey, tutelary or moral spirit who guides and governs an individual through life. From Latin genius, but this is interesting to me because it is a kind of spirit that we're talking about here. Yeah. Maybe you had already covered that, but to me, I guess I'm thinking back to our Hereditary Part 2. We talked about.
Wow, we're really hardcore. Go watch that episode, guys.
This is actually the second episode. We talked about the daemon. This is what made me release the emergency word of the podcast because daemon, and then I thought genius, but they actually sound related. Anyway, continue.
Yeah, and they may be. I mean, one is just the French. We're using the French for it, génie, but. It is that idea of a Descartes. It's likened to a demon, essentially. But I don't know if you can particularly conflate it with the Western demon, because he doesn't necessarily say it's like this entirely evil. There's also just this idea that it's a malevolent.
Well, genius seems to come from Latin, and what I'm wondering if there's a relation from the Latin of genius back to daemon, which I think which is Greek. But anyway, that's for another.
That is for another one.
So
the thing about Descartes is that he was kind of hardcore with the skepticism. Because, I mean, you got to understand how much of a fucking skeptic you have to be to say, all this shit, what if it's a demon? What if everything that I know is an illusion created by a demon whose only purpose is to make me believe that I know what I know? How would I unravel this scheme to figure out what is real and what is not? So Descartes, bless his soul, this man had a dedication to skepticism that no one fucking has anymore. No one fucking has this shit. That's what pisses me off so much. Everybody wants to say that I know that this thing. What if you instead asked about what you don't know? What a cool fucking idea to approach the world asking and said, how do I know? Ooh, that mic must have exploded just now. Like I got so close to it. But how do I know? How do I know that this is true? How do I know that that is real? How do I know that this is a fact? How do I know? Where do I get these ideas from? Maybe don't say that you think it's a demon. That may not be accepted anymore as a line of questioning. But you could consider what ideas you may have picked up along your life that are poisoning your thought process. And that is the Cartesian approach to skepticism. So he essentially had this idea that if you had just one false belief, it could leak out into your other thinking processes and poison them so as to make all of your thinking and your understanding of the world inaccurate. So what did he do? He tossed all that shit out. He basically tried to unravel all of his thought so as to make sure and examine every belief that he did have and say, can I prove that this is real? Is this truly accurate? How do I know? Can you imagine? It's like cleaning your dead grandmother's attic and going through everything and saying, well, what is this? You don't do it. You just hire someone. You're like, get rid of the shit. Like, I want to keep this thing because I already know it, but I'm going to ignore the rest of the stuff. He went through every little dust-covered trinket and said, what is this? Where did it come from? What does it mean? Do I have use for it? Can I use it reliably? And what he found out is there's not a lot that of our thinking that is solid. And that's the skeptic's way. But it's also Truman's way. Because Truman, in the end of the movie, says, and it's just, I love it. It's a beautiful line. Was any of it real? It is very like Jim Carrey being dramatic. Was any of it real? I love it. And he says, though, a really important line that I liked, and I actually like how he delivered it, because he's finding out that so much of what he believed was the real world was illusory. And his response at one point is, but you never had a camera in my head. And this is, I think, very much like Descartes' cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Truman takes solace in the fact that his thoughts were still real. No matter what the world was around him, no matter what illusions were created, what came out of him, his own thoughts were originated within him. He was real because of his thoughts. You want to add something? I'm going to give you a moment there. Breaking the monologue.
I was actually watching.
You just hanging out there watching things?
Not just now. I mean,
okay.
In the recent past, I was watching the documentary series Civilization by Kenneth Clark, A Personal View, which is from the late 60s. And there's a short bit about René Descartes. And you were saying something along the lines of, people these days don't approach their own beliefs with as much skepticism. And, I mean, he was obviously an extremely ruthless interrogator of himself, we'll say. But you have to understand, again, and I go back to this sometimes, René Descartes was born at the very end of the 1500s. His mom died in childbirth. They didn't think he would live because of that. He had extremely poor health. He went into a Jesuit academy when he was like 12 years old, became a military officer, and was a mercenary. He was actually a soldier and a mercenary for the beginning of his life. And then had a vision in a room where there was a fireplace or oven or something along those lines. It's interesting to me that so much of the beginning of what we consider rationality, reason, and science. So if you think about figures like Descartes, you think about figures of Newton or Isaac Newton. And I think I mentioned about this last time. Isaac Newton was really big into the study of alchemy and reading the Bible and looking for hidden messages in the Bible.
You
think of him.
I think he was into like theosophical thought.
That's
like
no, that
esotericism.
Didn't come, that didn't come. Theosophical, I always have a problem with that word. That's later.
No, yeah, that's a specific society.
Right. But yeah, of course, he was looking for coded messages in the Bible. He was studying alchemy, all these kinds of things. And I just think that it's interesting. We see these people in the 1700s, in particular, the Age of Reason, the Enlightenment figures, as these strictly rational, scientific people because they came up with a lot of those rules and thoughts.
Yeah.
But, Rene Descartes actually had dreams thinking that in this room, he thought that a divine spirit revealed to him this new philosophy. And so, I don't know. I just think we got to remember there's always this, if you want to call it irrational or spiritual belief, inherent in a lot of what we think of as early science and early rationality, at least as inspiration to it somehow.
Yeah. Well,
in some
I
of the
think
figures.
that's like in a way.
And also Descartes had a hard life. That was my point. Sorry, my original point was that Descartes had a hard life, and maybe that is what helps people sometimes take the leap into investigating themselves so much, because Jim Carrey in Sea Haven, if your life is going fairly well, okay, it may not be extraordinary. Your wife may just be whatever. Your job may be whatever, but it's not bad. He has time to relax. He has his friend. They, hit golf balls, whatever.
Yeah.
If there isn't anything that forces you to look for something else, then I don't think that most people do.
And that's the idea of, sometimes something cracks in the world. And in a way, that was even my approach to this movie. When I first saw the movie, I was kind of like, hey, I'm chilling. Okay, cool movie. And then the next time I saw it, it was, I had a different approach to it because I had lost some of my youthful naivety in the past years. And so I came to it more in a place of, oh, let me see what going on here. And there you go. When you look, you find more than what you had assumed was there previously. But you have to look. And that's one of the main questions, I think, of this film is that, you watch Truman, and in a way, what makes it such an important film is that it's the journey that every human being must take in some regards, which is you let go of your own, you push your limitations. That's one of the major things, is that Truman pushes the limitations of his world, his own limitations, and that's how he finds more. Once he starts to push to the edge, to see what else is there, to pursue the cracks in his world. And really the question is, how many people are truly willing to question their world as ruthlessly as Truman? Most would rather not ask, how's it going to end? And that's one of the lines in the movie that I think there's actually this part where, it shows the little button on Sylvia's jacket, which is like kind of reminds me of a Lynch film for some reason. It's this very kind of vague question that's at the same time deeply existential and slightly ominous. How is it going to end? How often do we ask ourselves that question?
In the film, aren't they talking about how the show is going to end?
Yeah, exactly. But the show is his life,
Right,
so
right,
it's
right.
How is that going to end? And do you question that? That's one of the interesting things is do we question where our lives are going? And Truman starts to question that. He says at one point, don't you feel like your life is building towards something? Where is this going? And that's in a way the existential journey, the journey for meaning, for more. And many people are content with the shadows on the wall. Many people don't want to know more, and that's fine. In Nietzsche's mind, that was fine. Nietzsche did think that most people were not meant. Every person can't be a philosopher, and that's just a fact. Also, not every person needs to go out on a journey of the deepest truths, but we do need those people. And Now, this comes into the next part, is that we do need people who are willing to go on a journey much farther away from what we might be willing to do, to go and question what we might not be willing to question, to push us. That was what Socrates did, and he didn't care. He questioned everything. He drove everybody crazy. He was annoying. Eventually, they were just like, "We got to get rid of this guy. He's doing too much. He's questioning too much. We can't even get anything done." Because every time we pick up a pencil, he asks us, well, how do you know it's a pencil? Or something like this. And so there is an important role for the questioner, but it's not everybody's role. Now, there's a totally different element to the Truman Show that you can come at it from. And it's one of the more obvious elements of this film, which is the controlled environment. Having your world cultivated and controlled for you. The movie starts with a TV show-esque intro where you have different characters, different actors in the film, but also the characters of Truman's life speaking about their role and their feelings about the show. And his best friend says, wait, I love it. It's a great line. Nothing here is fake. It's just all controlled. And that's such an interesting way to approach our online world today. Maybe it's not all fake yet, but it is very controlled. And that's one way that we can consider, how do we go about our world when the knowledge that the information we're getting is increasingly controlled, particularly when so many of us get our information from social media. Last time I read a study, it was something like 62% of Americans get their news from social media. And we know, as we constantly make jokes on this podcast, social media as a means of disseminating information is increasingly controlled. The algorithm.
I mean, I am willing to talk about Gnosticism, the Demiurge, Rene Descartes' personal life, benign dictatorship, but in a spirit of humility, I must say, you know that I am no expert on social media.
Good for you.
I am no expert on social media. My whole thing about it has basically been, don't use it, delete it from your phone. And then you always say, I can't, and you make up reasons for why you can't. And one of them is valid. One. And the rest is not, in my opinion.
I like to think of social media as Descartes' digital demon. What if social media is the demon, Descartes' demon all along? What if social media is Christoff? What if we log on and we say, oh, look, here's the news. Oh, look, here are my buddies online. Oh, look, here is some random person commenting their ideas about something. Do you know that it's not a Chinese plant? Do you know that it's not a Russian bot? How do you know that it's not Twitter removing everything that could be a different view from what they think you want to see out of your view? And
so you don't know. The only way to approach that is to be skeptical about everything you see, which if you choose to do, is extraordinarily exhausting, mainly fruitless, and a recipe for mental illness. That is why I don't know. I mean, I don't suggest. I wonder if people enjoy it. That's the thing I don't understand.
No, they're
anymore.
Miserable. That's the thing. They're miserable, but they're addicted to it. And it's a false sense of knowledge is what I think is so addicting, is that you log on and you feel like, I know something about my world. I've read something. I'm going to tell something. I'm going to tell someone what I know. I'm going to talk. I'm going to tell people what I know. It's all more illusions. The thing is, it's a fake world that we're increasingly spending more and more time on and treating like it's a real world. And it's a dangerous thing because once upon a time, you were a philosopher, you went out of your house, you went into the field and you said, look at this plant. What the fuck is this plant about?
Field.
What if I put this plant and I mixed it with this other plant? What would happen? And these things were in your fucking hand so you could test them. Now we go into our fake world and we take a headline about that plant and we say, hey, look, it says this plant does this. Okay, sure, maybe. You don't know. We don't know. It's all someone else's ideas, and that's fine. For the most part, we can, you have to check your sources. But what I do essentially is, unless I'm willing to do the research onto something, if I see a headline that says Trump killed a baby today, if I'm not going to go read the article and then spend the time finding other articles to contrast that article against, and then try to find public opinion and see how that's swaying, and go to my trusted journalistic sources and see if they've commented on it, if I'm not going to do that, I strike it from the record of my knowledge, because that's what you have to do. Because today we're given so much information, and it's very easy to take in that information and be like, well, I heard Trump killed a baby. That's, I heard it. But we don't research it. We don't know anything. We don't check it. We just hear it. And that's it. We run with it. That's in a way, it's very irresponsible and it's very dangerous because, one, it's not the real environment. It's not like you can go outside and say, well, it's raining. I see it because it's right here. I see the rain. We go online and it says, well, it's raining in this other place. Trust us. Maybe. I can't see that. I can't test it. So either you do the research on it, or really you don't know, and you should not accept a bunch of information that you haven't tested.
So don't believe the weather report.
Don't believe it.
There's, oh man, social media and me. That's the name of my new essay. Social media.
I don't like that.
And me.
Social media and me sounds like something for a baby, like a child's book that it's like, like, I don't know, like shapes and me. Something like it's supposed to be benign, but then it's social media and me, which is like, ooh, that sounds like a crackhead, confessional.
So I don't want to go too far off the track because we could talk about this a long time, and I clearly have a lot of skepticism and rage towards social media, even though I shouldn't really, because I don't participate in enough to actually be annoyed by it.
Well, I annoy you enough by telling you about it. That's for sure. But you won't even have my annoyance. I tell you one thing and you treat me like I've told you all the news for the day that I've consumed, and I'll just say like someone left me a comment and you look at me like, oh. Okay,
all right. So let's just put it out there. I'll tell you why. And I made this analogy to you before. You telling me about you being annoyed, this will be helpful to the viewers.
Will it?
You telling me,
viewer me for them.
No, it's not. It's not. Everyone does this. Everyone does this. I do it.
Should it be the listeners? It's a podcast. Just because we have video.
I do this too. This too. I'll pretend like it's me if you prefer. When if anyone could possibly believe this, when I call you and I'm like, oh my God. Someone just totally said this.
Okay, whoa. That's way worse than if it was just me.
Okay.
Just do it on me instead.
When you say something about being annoyed about something on Twitter there are so many steps removed from my own experience in life, I understand, and as your friend I listen. However, do you know how when you get something out of the refrigerator that is rotten and you start to eat it and it smells bad and you know that it's rotten and your first instinct is not to throw it away but to turn to your friend and be like, smell this. Isn't this rotten? And like, why? You know it is. You know it's terrible.
Want to share the burden.
Yeah.
Gotta share the burden.
I don't know.
Gotta show you how disgusting. There's a thrill. There's a thrill. We get on there and we look at the shit and it's disgusting and it's a disaster and it's like, look at that fucking train fire. Slow down and look at the accident. Look at the car flipped over. Let's slow down. It's the same
worry
impulse.
about it. I actually do worry about it a little bit.
You should.
Because not you with regard to Twitter or whatever, but just And then I see, but here's where I'm just going to start speculating about a dystopian future. And I mean, do we really need to do that?
Yes,
Would
we
Renee
do.
Descartes? Okay. So I don't see how it's possible we're ever going to have a unifying narrative again, number one, any semblance of it. And we'll just talk about our country, America.
Yeah.
I don't see how that's ever possible. I also don't see how it's ever possible that we're not going to slowly descend into a... When virtual reality really starts to take off, when the headsets start coming down, like that there is going to be an industry arising to cater to the belief systems of separate communities who reside within entirely virtual communities.
So let me jump in there.
Maybe fine. Maybe it's peaceful enough if you keep them all separated. The problem is you can't link them up, because if you link them up, then there's going to be cyber warfare.
The newest game. Kill real people without actually killing them. God knows.
Only Christoff knows. That's why, maybe Sea Haven's the best.
Christoff knows. Well, here's the thing, is that already kind of exists in a way. So you already have, and this has been investigated in some capacity, the idea that the way algorithms are working online, and that's not only social media, that can be Google even, like search engines that rank results based on what they think you would like, based on what your search history is. This creates a kind of bubble. I think there's actually a term for it, filter bubble. And this idea, it's the idea of keep the customer happy, but this is also information. So once upon a time, we did have a more unifying narrative because there was not so many different sources of information. You had Walter Cronkite or something, and everybody turned on the same channel at the same time to receive the same news in the same way. So regardless of your individual politics, you still got the same story. You got the same narrative. Now you have the ability to just completely bypass even the traditional institutional media and kind of find your own little community of total disinformation, it could even be. And that can be where you get your news. That can be where you get information from. Some random blog with no sources. I mean, I've seen older adults share headlines with that if you follow the article and you look at the place that it's coming from, there's no author, there's no information about the website. I remember following an article once to see, well, is this true? This is pretty damning information if it's true. And I went to this website and there was nothing on it. It was just a website with articles and there was no information about the creators. So this is actually kind of scary. Because you have the ability now to end up in these bubbles where you only consume the information that supports your worldview. And so you have these algorithms that are working to facilitate that because we want to keep you on the page.
Can't you just sign out?
You seeing what you want. Well, you can sign out of Google.
Yeah, and then use because I've heard people do this, right?
I mean, your search history, the cookies, the cache on your browser.
But there's ways to get rid of all that and go browse the internet as essentially fresh person.
You can use a different search engine too, which is recommended. Use DuckDuckGo or something that's better. And
then see how it differs or whatever. But again,
yeah, exactly. And you'll see it does. I've done it before when there are certain things where I've searched on Google and then I've searched on DuckDuckGo, and it'll bring up different results that were not even on the same page as
not only that, go to YouTube. I did this recently. Go to YouTube. I'm usually just signed in. I of course it just puts everything, like videos that I would clearly like about history or whatever. And then I signed out, and it's like there's just videos about like these people I've never seen. They're like 15 years old, like throwing Jello at each other or something. I don't even fucking know what is happening. It looks like it's entertainment for
Careful.
For children.
It
looks like it's entertainment for children.
Which is already disturbing.
I don't understand. I don't know.
Well, that's the scary thing, is that you can end up in this weird rabbit hole where you log on, and I've done it. It's funny though, because
I want to be in my rabbit hole though. I saw what was outside, and it's
what if
Jello.
Your rabbit hole is the Jello shots party? What if your rabbit hole is you log in to your actual account and it's just everybody throwing Jello at each other and weird vlogs about people? I went to the store and I complain, and that's your whole world online, and you never see anything that, hey, this is interesting. I mean, it's a weird thing because it's this, it's also, I really detest. Exactly. I really detest this curatorial world where your world is curated for you. And this is something that comes a lot with, you know, the age of the blog, where here are my favorite things, 10 of my favorite books. Here is my favorite playlist of music. You know, go find your own shit. You know, like, it's great to look at things like, oh, let's see what this person likes. I like their way they think. Like, what do you read? I think that's great. But you also have to be careful that you don't become dependent on this curatorial culture where everybody tells you what you should like. Here, what do you like this? Would you be interested in this? We think you'd like this. You know what? You don't have enough time to sit back and say, that tree reminds me of... Why does the tree's leaves look like that? That's interesting. I'm going to look at some independent research. I mean, go outside, have independent thoughts, and then do the research on those, and then follow through with that. And then you actually become a more creative, independent thinker instead of, constantly having things curated for you and fed to you.
But there is a problem of the expansion of knowledge that at such a rate. And I mean, look, there's a reason there are librarians. Yeah. Librarians are there to help guide you towards sources of information. You have to come up with the original question. This is what I'm interested in. I need help looking at this. That librarian is then going to move you towards that. Otherwise, you would be confronted with a vastness of thousands or hundreds of years of information about a given topic, and you wouldn't know where to begin. So there's got to be some sort of... The problem is that when the curator is actually genuinely trying to help you get to an answer to your questions, or when they're taking... ad revenue for clicks. See, that's where my concern comes in. Because I understand the necessity of people who are experts in a field of knowledge helping people towards answers to their questions, especially in a complex world. The problem is the motivations of those people. But you know how I feel about all this. Like, I always am just like, throw your phone off into the ocean. That's my... you say things, I'm just like, just turn it off. And I don't know if it's helpful because you know what? I only follow my own advice half the time. I oftentimes, and that's you. And that's me. And I am a surly, angry, like kind of,
And you're older too, which is people that were raised with the phone. No.
Let's not get into ageism.
No, there's a certain generation, and I am of this generation too. I think I'm the last of this generation. I didn't get my smartphone until I was like 21, something like that. And I didn't really start using social media on it until like later, even in that year. I didn't really get into it. And Twitter, I didn't even start using it for years later. That was the beginning and the end. But... now we have generations that, you get the phone before you can even talk. And it's like you give the kid the phone as a way to pacify them. Not that they're making a social media account if they can't talk, but once they can talk, they make these accounts. And you have kids that are they're like 13 and they have social media. And what you're going to give your 12-year-old, your 13-year-old a crash course in telling what's disinformation and understanding that the algorithm is influencing what they see and that necessarily what they see isn't the whole understanding of the world, but merely a curated version of that world, and that they have to make a conscious effort to question what's left out, but they have to first conceive of what might be left out every time they gain information. I mean, that's insane. That's insane. That's beyond what even most adults can use their cognitive processes to do with the information that we're getting through these phones.
You can do it, but it's just too time consuming and it's too
that's the thing.
Tired. Yeah. It makes you...
And that's why I come back to my principle, which is if I don't do the research, I don't accept the information. It's not, I just don't.
But then you also, I think, have to take another step, ideally, and say, I don't even want the information to hit my eyeballs.
That's the other thing. Yeah. And that's
but that's dangerous. I mean, you in theory want to find a balance between, I don't know. I mean, you know what? I'm not going to solve social media. The problem is this. The thing that really I wonder about is no one seems happy with it anymore. That's the thing that really makes me suspicious. And maybe I seem more grumpy about it. And maybe I seem slightly more concerned, or you do also. But everyone I talk to...
No one enjoys it.
No one enjoys it. So why... So what's going to happen is my question. Are we going to reach a point where
How does it end?
Where somehow people disconnect entirely to this? If it just makes them feel irritable and angry, even if they're addicted? Or are we just going to slowly accept it and live in a world of irritability and disinformation and anger? And unfortunately, that seems like the most likely thing.
You know, I think it's hard because there are waves of people. There are kind of like different tiers of people that are having different relationships with social media. For someone like me that's been pretty online for a few years and uses it in a more professional capacity to promote things and blah, blah, blah. I'm already at the stage of disillusionment that I know it is both for my health and for my own productivity, for my own ability to further my career and myself as a human being that I have to distance myself. And I'm losing interest in it. I'm genuinely losing interest in using these things. So that's one existence.
We should know something that you also tell me, because you do complain a lot about it. But you know what you also say? You say, hey, I got a message from somebody that really liked my newsletter, and it meant a lot to me that this person, has reached out. So there are good, and I'm old enough, as you point out, to remember an earlier incarnation of the internet that did not have to do with social media. And there was an idealism and a feeling that this is going to revolutionize communication, let people, affinity groups, speak to one another over distances that wouldn't be easy to cover. Like there are good things about it. My problem isn't with the internet. My problem is with social media, because I think that it is not ultimately meant to make you happy, healthy, secure, better, anything. I think that it's meant to make you're just a piece of iron ore to be mined by people and then be sold off. That's what I really think it is. And at the end of the day, that is what it is.
Yeah, I mean,
have I just gone
agree.
Totally,
I mean, look, at this point, there are certain social media applications that are a danger to even use. So something like Twitter, you use that wrong, and if forget it, whatever, it doesn't matter your career, can end your career. If you say something that's slightly controversial, or not even controversial, but worded incorrectly, and it gets picked up by the wrong account that has enough followers, that can be it can cause you personal strife in your real world life. So it gets to a question of, is it even worth dabbling in something like that? There's an application like Instagram is a little less risky. I actually find that I'm liking Instagram more because it doesn't have as many of the character limits on the comments that Twitter does. So Twitter is almost perfectly designed to be inflammatory and to heighten a horrible culture. Everything is the communication is limited, and it can be passed along throughout as wide a community as Twitter can be, which doesn't really make sense for any type of quality in terms of discussion or connection. It's more like a massive, unstable village. And that's not really a place you want to kind of hang out. Whereas Instagram at this point is more, it's image-based, and there's even the comments, you have an ability to communicate a little more deeply, and so you don't get as much of the miscommunication too. I know there's sometimes people send me something on Twitter and it sounds a little snarky, but I give them a benefit of the doubt because there's no space in the comment for them to, I constantly have to cut out, I think, I could be wrong, my idea. I have to cut all that out, all those kind of like humility markers and the little bit of nuance that you add into a conversation to show that, well, I'm open to being wrong about this. I'm open to discussion. Instead, I have to write, the thing is this, instead of saying, well, I think possibly the thing could be. So by the nature of just the limit upon communication that Twitter has, it's not a good medium for connecting with people. I mean, I at this point, I log on to Twitter twice a week to answer people that are communicating with me in good faith, and that's it. I don't go on there, and I schedule all my posts through another program, and I don't go on more than twice a week for 20 minutes each time, just to answer people, and that's it. And still, the other night I went on to do that, and there was still someone had left a quote under one of my tweets. Nice quote, fine, Bertrand Russell, cool. And someone was like, Bertrand Russell is a piece of shit who couldn't have done anything in his life if he fucking tried. He's the garbage can, and you should run back to your junior college because obviously you don't know what the fuck you're talking about, and you're just a shitty. And it's just like, buddy, what are you doing? Like, what is this asylum? It's like a fucking asylum. You get on there and it's like a zoo of people that are just unleashing their pent up frustration with life onto fucking avatars with strangers that are like, what are you, probably lashing out back at them. It's a very dark culture. So I think in a way that maybe eventually we will start to phase out. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see because the things are so new. I don't think we have even gotten to the stage of understanding that these programs or whatever applications, they're going to have documented effects on people's mental health. They already do, but the research is so new and it's so hard to isolate, what is social media, what is your own mental health. It's so hard to study that it's not, it doesn't gain as much traction as quickly. And there's a weird reaction where everybody's kind of defensive about talking about social media as being a negative thing in and of itself. It's some kind of weird, like, oh, it's just the old folks are mad at us for being on our phone. It's like, well, you're the ones that are trying to like destroy people's careers and constantly miserable online. So I don't know. The evidence is you post it. So I think that in a way we will start to see that social media is so bad for people. It's so bad for us that either social media, other companies will start to design things that are different, that remedy the flaws that make such dark cultures on social media and kind of like just ruin people, make people lesser versions of themselves. Or people, enough research and understanding will come out that will realize, shit, I don't even want to be part of that. Like I really think at this point, like if you have a mental health issue, which we pretty much all do on some level. I mean, you might have some mild level of depression, some mild level of anxiety. If you have that, you shouldn't use social media. You really shouldn't. It's very bad for that. If you have anxiety, depression, or whatever else, you shouldn't use these things. They're
is this doctor? Is this medical advice again?
This is medical advice from someone with no medical background. And I'm going to give it to you because it's anecdotal advice. So how about that? It's anecdotal medical advice. For my own mental health, when I use it more versus less, I feel worse. The end. I mean, every time.
Yeah, it's not the end, though, because...
done the experiment again and again and again. Every time, it's the same outcome.
That's the problem. You do the experiment over and over and over again. And that's what that's my thing is like, you're like, research will come out showing this is harmful. I mean, yes, I agree. Do you really need the research if you just talk to people and ask? But also... how much?
No, I don't think a lot of people even understand how much their negativity and like how miserable it makes them.
Yeah.
Because they really think that they're getting news every day and that they're just staying informed and they understand the world. And they don't realize that the world that they're getting shown is the world that they want to see, because every day they click on why Trump has ruined something or why Biden is enacting some kind of communist manifesto or something. And so every day they click on that, and every day the algorithm is like, hey, you want to see more shit about how the world is getting ruined in exactly the way that you thought it was getting ruined?
Most people know this by now, though? A lot of people? Maybe they don't. I don't know. I don't.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. When I get a news article, I don't immediately discount it and say, well, this is only shown to me because I clicked on something before and that's why I know it was shown to me, and so I discount it. I still see the article. You know, I still see it. It still is fed to me. It still affects me. And so I think that, yeah, some people know that there's an algorithm, but...
I just keep coming back to just turn it off. I don't know. I know it's hard. Yeah. But there is a power button on your phone. There's not just a button that makes the screen go off. There's a power button to it. And I don't want to give advice to people about this because I don't care. And also I don't know. And again, I'm just kind of that guy who's like, throw your phone in the ocean. Throw the phone away. But
yeah,
I have... Even though I'm not really prone towards using it a lot, I found myself using it a lot, especially during the election, which came up because
I think everybody went particularly crazy
during
the election
time
because
of
all that.
tension, anxiety, information, constantly, all that. Yep. At some point, I just said to myself, I actually have to make a concerted effort not to do this, and I started leaving my phone in a separate room off and I took a book. And I would take that down to the other room, and that's what I would do when I would read. I would read that, try to stay off the phone, and it made me feel better. Didn't make me feel perfect, but it made me feel better. So I don't know. I don't know. There's I'm kind of curious. I'm kind of curious how it plays out. I'm kind of curious. How it plays out. I see that. I think weirdly possibly the only way for things to remain kind of calm and peaceful in a way is not for unity to occur, not for people to freely share their opinions to one another and have good faith debate with one another, because I'm not sure we're capable of doing that within the context of social media. I think that can happen in person and in real debates and in stuff like that. I don't think I think that the context of the technology doesn't allow for that. And so what I speculate is going to happen is there's going to be just communities which pair off and become isolated, and they do believe their own little sea havens. And then as long as those don't collide with one another, in a sense, you can have these people living in their kind of virtual worlds, without bothering one another. The problem is, of course, that we actually, at some point, do actually have to talk to people in person as human beings. And then, let's say I'm speculating wildly because I'm on the coffee, but the coffee's wearing off. Imagine in the future where you have these people that believe such different things, in their little VR pods. They live off in their little VR pods and their little VR communities, and they believe these things. And then in the real world, in the time you have to leave your VR pod to go hang out with other people for whatever reason, you could have, and you see this sometimes, you talk to people and you just think this person has a nearly completely different conception of world events or the news that I do. They have
they live in a different world.
Yeah. And can you, that's
hard
going
to connect.
I think that's going to increase. I don't think it's going to decrease.
I think so too.
And then it's going to increase to a level to which hopefully, but we never confront, whenever people confront the other, it doesn't go well. I was kind of imagining as this like almost confrontation between alien societies and think, oh, maybe it could be peaceful in this kind of nice Star Trek way. But then I remember that's not real. Ends. Anyway, turn off your phone.
Here's the thing, that's my problem with this, is that we already have our own miniature sea havens online where it's really incredible. And I mean, I'm guilty of it. I have some people that I've followed that I try really hard to allow dissenting ideas to cross my timelines or feeds or whatever. But sometimes there's things that are just so ridiculous that I think, oh, I don't want to have to see your, buggy cognitive software every day. Gonna throw you out of my sea haven. Peace is restored. So in a way, we already curate and create our sea havens. We have these online communities where what we have is as it should be. Only the people that agree with us, only the ideas that further our current ideas. And that's, it's an effort that's furthered by the way that these algorithms function. You like a bunch of pictures of dogs on Instagram, you're going to get more pictures of dogs on Instagram. And that's fine. That's very harmless then. But if you're liking only, it's an interesting thing, because I watch sometimes videos on YouTube that are, critical of one side of politics. Then you start getting videos like, do you want to see videos of this? I saw that you watched a video critical of the Democratic Party. Would you like to watch a video in support of the Republican Party? Would you like this? Would you like that? And it's just, no. I would like to independently choose things as I go and not have everything curated for me based on this and that. And it's very easy to get into this kind of echo chamber. And that's a really dangerous thing, because this algorithm that creates your perfect echo chamber essentially strengthens groupthink. And so when you find yourself in this community where everybody is thinking the same way and everything supports the way you think, it is extremely jarring and upsetting when something or someone cracks through that echo chamber.
Perfect segue.
Ooh, you're going to segue right into my sentence, huh?
It's my sentence because I'm looking at the outline. That's where I put the giant, bold outline orange sentence that I added.
Yes, go on right ahead.
Which you don't like and you don't endorse.
I like how
you said go right ahead while you made a subconscious stabbing motion with the pencil in your hand. Go right ahead and interrupt me. Okay. So we were talking about the allegory of the cave, and it was this idea in it that the person who actually could escape, we assume a philosopher, who goes up into the real world of forms, and they see not just the fire that casts the shadows and the reflection, but the actual sun. First, they could barely look at the sun. In fact, they say in the allegory, okay, first the person who's released must look at the moon, slowly let their eyes accustom themselves to then eventually look at the brightness of the sun and contemplate it, which I actually don't know if that's a great piece of advice, to look directly at the sun. But anyway.
Yeah, I thought about that too. I was like, I don't think even a philosopher can't look directly at the sun.
I get his idea though. So then that person can go back down to the cave and tell the prisoners, hey, none of this is real.
Yeah.
No one, but then Plato says the prisoners would be really, really mad and basically tell them to shut up.
They plot to kill him,
and they would want to kill that person.
Yeah, which was great. He actually said something about how the prisoners then begin to they will violently resist this new information and even plot to kill him.
Which, you know what, that probably is a callback to Socrates.
Yeah, that is. I think it's very.
The philosopher goes back down there, and then
they try to kill him
to death. Yeah.
Exactly. And you see an interesting dynamic in the Truman Show that illustrates this idea that the person that dares to step outside of the cave and tries to bring that knowledge into the back into the cave is looked at with ire. So there's a scene, interesting, in the movie where Truman's at this point, he's trying to escape. He's trying to get out of the cave, and he knows that there's something else out there. And so this is the scene where they don't know where he is. So the whole community this community that loved him, supported him, his wife, his mother, his neighbor. This whole community bands together in what is essentially an organized mob. And they're all marching together through the entire community searching for him. But there's something interesting about this scene where you have the dog that jumps up on him every day, and he's kind of like wary about the dog, but doesn't seem aggressive or anything. In this scene, the dog becomes a full-on police dog, snarling and horrifying looking as they're all hunting for Truman. And this is exactly, this is both the idea Plato had that the person who starts to, break a hole into what the prisoners believe and starts to try to show people that the shadows aren't all there is, and the dissenter. This is the same idea as the person that dissents against the group. So the dissenter that tries to break outside of the groupthink, both are treated with hostility, and both can be hunted down and neutralized, shall we say. So this is a really cool element of the Truman film that I think, is easy to miss, that you have essentially the entire community turns against him. Now,
but the thing that is different about that is it's not that the community was, if we go to the Allegory of the Cave, it's not as though the community was threatened by him because Truman himself was showing truth to them. And that's where that analogy is a little off. It's the inverse of that, because in the Allegory of the Cave, right? In the Allegory of the Cave, the mob would have been upset that Truman was coming back to tell them the truth, but that's not the case in the movie. It's that they all know they're actors.
Yeah. Well, I think that's kind of where the idea of groupthink comes in interesting, because they want to control the way that what he thinks, what he does. There is a weird element there where they don't want him to be free. He clearly wants to leave. He clearly knows that this is not what it seems. And
they'd lose their jobs just as economic interest.
Well, I mean, but that's pretty unethical. So.
It is unethical, but it's, if you really explore that.
But I mean, that's how this is the idea. Again, the group survives by bringing the individual into line with the group. When the group is too powerful, where there's no room given to the individual to push and dissent, the dissenter becomes a threat to the sustainability of the group. And so the group turns on the individual to keep them in line for the group's own survival.
I think that's all absolutely true, that analysis of it. I just think that analysis of it with regards to this scene is different, because, or at least it's not what you would expect, because it's a little odd to me in the film anyway that that Christoff orders everyone in the community to go on a search for him, because if they found him that way, wouldn't they have to explain to him why the entire town? I guess they wouldn't. They'd just be like, "Oh, we're a small town. We like you so much, we decided to go look for you." But then,
that's what I thought too. It's weird, though. Like, you would think, okay, why is the entire community banding together to search for me in the middle of the night? It would be it would be one of those things, again, where this doesn't seem like it is what it seems. But that's already, there's so many instances in the film where he has these things that are like, something's wrong. Something doesn't make sense here. My understanding of this world as how I thought it was is breaking down. And that would be another one of those instances where that doesn't make sense, that the entire community would all in synchronicity search for me because I was not sleeping, well, his wife would say, "Oh, I thought you were kidnapped," or something like that. But
I think that there is this sense, though, in the film that, and it is the kind of and not bittersweet, isn't the kind of strange sweetness to the film, but also a little bit perverse, that all these people do. I think they actually do care about him in a way, and I think that all the people that are watching the Truman Show do actually care about him. There isn't. there's obviously some people like Sylvia, and there's obviously implied a group of people who think that it's inhumane to have basically trapped this person in a reality show. But I think that people do care about it. And I think that Christoff, this is why I always say that it's dangerous to assume that people have only one motivation. Because I think Christoff probably, in a way, he adopts him, right? As a child. Actually, in the real world, because Truman was, I think, an orphan, essentially, at birth. He adopts him as his child and son. I think that
the corporation adopts him, which is kind of a funny little bit of a dystopian, but it is Christoff's corporation, so yeah.
Is it? Yeah, I guess that would be a good question if it is or not, or if he's just the director. I'm
assuming it's his,
Yeah.
That's you can make that assumption.
There's something that he does care about him. I mean, he does. Now, as he pushes against this, though, the wrath comes out.
Now, that's what we're going to talk about in the other section of this podcast, where the relationship between Truman and Christoff, and also more Truman as an individual and his relationship to himself, because I think that you can see it is true that the relationship they have together it's not one thing. It's not very simple. There's more complexity to it. And I think Christoff is this interesting character to analyze from, on one level that you can analyze the character from is the idea of the devouring mother. Even though he's a director and a male, there is a really interesting idea there to see him as this overprotective figure to the point of smothering Truman and his ability to grow as an individual. So, but we'll tidy up this section by saying that I think, one of the best things that I took from this movie was the idea of Truman as kind of, how would you say, not the philosopher king, but the everyday philosopher in a way. How the person you should push the parts of your life that you assume you know about. Because you don't know. Maybe you are on a reality show and you don't know. Maybe you have been adopted by a corporation and you're actually living out your life in a master plan community dome created by a corporation that you are the child of.
You are living at a reality show of your own making. If you post everything you fucking eat on Instagram, you're living in a reality show of your own making. Fine. Yeah. Put your pictures of cake up there if you want. But I mean, you're just doing a low budget reality show.
Let them post cake.
Let them post cake. Thank you. Actually, I can't take credit for that. That was a good one. Let them post cake. That was good. I need more coffee. So
all right.
So
push your world. Be a Truman. And that's tune in for the next episode of this podcast. I think we're gonna split this into sections, and the other section is gonna be the nature of Christoff as actually a devouring mother, but also Truman as the true man, which is a really integral part of the movie, is this figure of Truman becoming a true man. All right. That's it. Oh, also, this whole section about the algorithm, I wrote a newsletter on that, so people should look at it. If you want to know more about the idea of the algorithm dividing us as a culture and a people, and the idea that filter bubbles create your own personal sea haven online, it's important. So you can look
actually
at the
subscribe.
Newsletter.
I subscribe to this newsletter. It is the only newsletter I subscribe to.
It's the only newsletter I subscribe to. No, that's not right. I actually subscribe to one other newsletter, and it's Matt Taibbi's newsletter, and it is.
I would do that. I like him.
It's the only newsletter that I would. I don't know how I ended up, because I'm very averse to things in my inbox, but I allow that, and it's worth it. But yeah, this newsletter, we'll link it in the show notes, because it gives more information about the person that also came up with the idea of the filter bubble. That's the whole idea. So, peace out.
See you later.
I threw it in my cup.
I heard that.